When it comes to longevity, there's no short-term fix. I say does not work. Turns out the third biggest predictor of living to 100 in the blue zone of Sardinia was how steep your village is. People who could articulate their sense of purpose were living about 8 years longer than people who are rudderless in life, reminding them to stop eating when their stomachs are 80% full. If you look at overall mortality, people who drink a little bit seem to live longer than people who don't drink at all. In most countries, people who belong to a faith also report higher levels of, are more satisfied with their lives. I know it's disruptive, but let's look at the facts. In 1980, 15% of Americans were obese, and now 45% of Americans are obese. Now, is that because we have somehow lost self-control as a population, or we have lost sense of responsibility, or we've lost discipline, or our parents love us less than we love our children less than our parents loved us? You start asking yourself, what's changed? And I don't think humans have changed. I don't think our bodies have changed. What I do think has changed is our environment. The number of fast food restaurants has gone up by about a factor of 20. Over 50% of all retail outlets, including where we get our tires changed and where we pick up our diabetes medicine, is a gauntlet of salty snacks, candy bars, and sugar sweetened beverages. And we're genetically hardwired to crave sugar, fat, and salt. You're in an environment where you can't escape it, and you have the Madison Avenue getting paid over $11 billion a year, the sharpest minds, advertising minds in the world, shaping messages, and over 300 messages rinse over our psyche every single day, reminding us that this food is delicious. In many cases, this food is fortified with vitamins. Very hard to beat that. Very hard to beat your genes and the onslaught of messaging all day long, every day. And we end up eating more. We end up eating the wrong things. And that's what I believe got us to this place we are right now. Well, and our hair is on fire about this terrible infectious disease known as the coronavirus. But in the span of time that 500,000 people lost their lives from COVID, about 6 million people died early death from preventable deaths from heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and dementia. So we kind of got bamboozled, and I'm not saying that COVID wasn't a serious disease; it continues to be. But the 900-pound gorilla in the room is not infectious disease; it's chronic disease. That's costing our country $3.7 trillion a year. And I think the big opportunity that was lost is as people retreated into their homes to not only reconnect with their families, but also to learn the lost art of cooking. Every time we go out to eat, and by the way, the average American goes out to eat 115 times a year. Every time we go out to eat, we consume about 300 more calories than we would if we ate at home. And that's because foodstuffs is cheap, and the restaurateurs understandably are trying to make as much profit as they can, but that usually means flavor enhancers, more sodium, more sugar, bigger portions, and a lot of the chronic health issues in America could be treated if we learned how to cook again in our homes, and we could control the ingredients, control the portions, and quite honestly eat as a family. And we know people eat as families tend to get better nutrition. They tend to eat slower. They tend to eat. 15 years ago, with funding from the National Institutes on Aging and with an assignment from National Geographic, a team and I sent out to, in a sense, reverse engineer longevity, which sounds, I know, like hyperbole, but there's a well-established Danish twin study. About 20% of how long we live is dictated by our genes. The other 80% is something else, lifestyle or environment. And so we reasoned that if we could find the statistically longest lived people working with demographers and then use established methodologies to see exactly what they do, we could get a pretty good idea for a formula for longevity. So working with demographers, we found the longest lived women in Okinawa, the longest lived men in Sardinia, Italy, an island in Greece called Ikaria, where people are living 8 years longer without dementia. The Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, the lowest rate of middle-age mortality in the world, and they spend 1/15th the amount we do on healthcare. And then right here in the United States, among the Seventh-day Adventists, Americans that are living up to 10 years longer than the rest of us. And we reasoned that if we could travel to these places, do a literature review, talk to the experts, and identify the common denominators or the correlates, we'd have a pretty strong idea of what is producing longevity. And that was the result of the cover story I wrote for National Geographic, and to date now 4 books on the topic. So this is disruptive, I know, but I say exercise does not work. We spend $120 billion a year or so on exercise programs, and America continues to get more obese. So fewer than 15% get the minimum recommended amount of physical activity, which is only 30 minutes a day. Yet we keep hammering on this idea of exercise. Meanwhile, in blue zones, people are thin. They don't suffer from obesity. They don't have CrossFit. They don't have yoga classes. They don't have ellipticals in their basement. But our team figures they move every 20 minutes or so. They live in places where every time they go to work, a friend's house, or out to eat, occasions of walk, they have gardens out back. They haven't engineered all the physical activity out of their lives with mechanical conveniences. So they're moving all day long, burning many more calories than they would if they sat in their offices all day long and tried to make it up in the gym. Plus, they keep their metabolism higher. So the result is more and better physical activity. Let me tell you something interesting. So I work with a very clever researcher in Sardinia, and he interviewed over 300 centenarians to find out and looked at their life to try to find out what seemed to be driving longevity or the correlation. Turns out the third biggest predictor of living to 100 in the blue zone of Sardinia was how steep your village is. So yet again, it's this it's not the conscious physical activity, it's the unconscious physical activity that's the result of your environment. You guys are in New York City, and you guys, I've been up to your wonderful offices there, My Body Green. People are fit, relatively speaking. And I would argue it's not because you have better gyms, but because people are walking to the subway and biking to work and even getting in public transportation all the time makes a difference. If you could put purpose in a capsule, it'd be a blockbuster drug. Robert Buettner, first founding director of the National Institutes on Aging, led a study that looked at the retrospective writings of people and then tracked them over time and found that people who could articulate their sense of purpose were living about 8 years longer than people who are rudderless in life. And in blue zones, not coincidentally, I believe, there's vocabulary for purpose. People know why they wake up in the morning. They have, as they call it in Okinawa, ikigai. And again, these are all associations. I can't draw a causal relationship between these factors, but I can tell you all blue zones are imbued with purpose, and they live a long time. The worry, the hurry, the stress of the human condition is the same where we live as it is in blue zones. People worry about their finances and their health and their children. But what they have that we've forgotten since the time of our grandparents are these sacred daily rituals of prayer, of taking a nap, of Okinawans do ancestor venerations 15 minutes a day to remember their forefathers and mothers. And in Sardinia, they do happy hour, which favorite of ours. So I took this from the Okinawan adage of hara hachibu. It's actually Confucian saying, reminding them to stop eating when their stomachs are 80% full. And if you're ever lucky enough to meet a centenarian in Okinawa, you'll almost always see them before a meal intone those 3 words, hara hachibu, to remind themselves to stop eating before they're full, completely full. And that usually manifests itself on the plate. So they put the 80% amount of food. After a while, you get a pretty good idea of what's going to, fill you up adequately and what's going to stuff you. And then they pre-plate the food and put the leftovers away. And we know from Cornell Food Lab, that is an effective strategy of mitigating calories. And it's something Okinawans have been doing it all along. For the book, The Blue Zone Solution, I worked with Walter Willett at Harvard to do a meta-analysis, 155 dietary studies done in all blue zones over the last 80 years or so. And if you average it all together, people there are eating 90 to 100% whole plant-based food. It's mostly whole grains, greens, tubers like sweet potatoes, nuts, and beans. I agree. If you're eating a cup of beans a day, it's probably adding 4 years to your life expectancy. They do eat meat, hence plant slant. And most of my work is done with cities. You get hired by cities to lower the obesity rate. And if you come in with this hardline vegan mandate, people show you the door in a hurry. But if you come in saying, look, I know you're going to eat what you want to eat, but here's what the longest lived people are eating, and they're only eating meat about 5 times a month. So you may want to heed that example and try to get more greens, beans, and nuts into your meals. There's a lot of studies about alcohol. It's been associated with higher levels of breast cancer in women, prostate cancer. But if you look at overall mortality, people who drink a little bit seem to live longer than people who don't drink at all. And certainly in blue zones, they're enjoying a glass or two of their favorite alcoholic beverage every day. I like to talk about this blue zones wine in Sardinia, Cananao, that has 3 times the levels of polyphenol. So we don't know if it's the wine that is producing the highest concentration of male centenarians in the world, or if they just like to drink, but the two seem to go hand in hand. That's a lesson that I take to heart. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I have to say of the 400 or so centenarians I interviewed, all but 5 believed in a faith and belonged to a faith-based community. And if you look at the academic literature, you see that people who report showing up to church, temple, or mosque at least 4 times a month are living between 4 and 14 years longer than people who don't. So we don't know if showing up once a week is helpful to your health because it forces you to slow down and think of a higher power, or you're less likely to engage in risky behavior, or if you have a better social network, or if there's a God and God said. But at the end of the day, there's no downside on that practice and probably a lot of upside. I also wrote a cover story for National Geographic on happiness, an effort to distill all the available survey data in the world. So data-backed formula for happiness. And clearly, in most countries, people who belong to a faith also report higher levels are more satisfied with their lives. This is most clear in Sardinia. The blue zone in Sardinia, interestingly, they're genetically different than the rest of Italy and the rest of the island. In fact, they originated in what is today the Basque country. They moved along the southern coast of France through Corsica into Sardinia about 11,000 years ago. We know that by looking at mitochondrial DNA. And they dealt with invaders, beginning with the Phoenicians, then the Romans and the Arabs. And they got progressively pushed up into the highlands, where they really had to fend for themselves. And it's so clear that they have this outside sense of community and family, and they needed that to survive. And that lingers to this day. If you talk to a guy our age in Sardinia and ask him what motivates him to get up and go to work every day, he'll never say financial freedom or I'm trying to get ahead of my career. It's for their children or their grandchildren. People are deeply committed to their aging parents. The moment you put your aging parent in a retirement home, their life expectancy drops between 2 and 6 years. Very rarely happens in Sardinia. You keep your aging parents nearby where they're put to work. Their wisdom, their resilience is harnessed. Their agricultural knowledge, their women are always the keepers of the food tradition. And it turns out that in a family where there's an aging parent nearby, the children actually have lower rates of mortality and lower rates of disease. So it's this virtuous circle that older people are living longer, kids are surviving better. And it's all because family's a priority. And especially now around the holidays, it's not a bad idea to think about reinforcing those family bonds.
Yeah, multi-generational living.
Yeah,
huge. Huge.
I'm a huge fan of that. And again, once again, I believe that is environmentally driven. Until very recently, Portland And a few other cities changed their code to allow for mother-in-law apartments so they could change their garage into an apartment. That all of a sudden made it easy to have multi-generational homes. When you're thinking of multi-generational homes, you need to have easy access for the older people. And you also want a home that, as you point out at Mind Body Green there, where there's opportunity to climb stairs for the younger people. So we conceived the Blue Zones home where aging mom and dad would live on the first floor, and or grandma and grandpa rather, and mom and dad with the kids will live on a second and third floor. So they got to run up the stairs every day. That kind of moving naturally type exercise. And at the same token, the grandparents aren't as high risk of falling down and having a fatal broken hip or something. When it comes to longevity, there's no short-term fix. We've all heard of these superfoods and supplement, anti-aging, resveratrol, metformin, all these. None of them have been proven or any shown any convincing evidence in humans to reverse or stop aging. It's just not on the scientific horizon yet. So if you want to add years to your life, you have to think about doing the right thing and avoiding the wrong thing for long enough to not develop chronic disease. And we're usually talking decades. So most of the things, New Year's resolutions right around the corner, half of Americans will run and make a resolution, and they'll forget about it by about January 21st. We keep trying these things over and over again and fail. Most exercise programs, supplements, and diets are short-term adventures. Friends are long-term adventures. We tend to have our best friends tend to be in our lives for decades. And friends have a measurable impact on your health behaviors. We know that if your three best friends are obese and unhealthy, there's a 150% better chance you'll be overweight. Alcoholism, drug abuse, all measurably contagious, smoking measurably contagious. But also, so are the good habits. Being a vegetarian. If all your friends are eating plant-based food, you tend to eat plant-based food. If all your friends ride bicycles and play golf or garden, you're more likely to do these things. So one of the most powerful things you can do to add good years to your life is really carefully curate that core group of friends. Okinawans call it a moai, but it's really the circle of friends that you can count on a bad day, that you can have meaningful conversations with, and that you're in pretty regular contact with.